As Tom Brady put on his 7th Super Bowl ring, many people began calling him the greatest athlete of all time. But some feminists dispute that claim. They argue that Serena Williams, the tennis player, has won more championships, and therefore she is the greatest athlete of all time. Now, I think it's ridiculous to compare male and female athletes to one another. But even just looking at the female athletes, have these people never heard of Caitlyn Jenner? Caitlyn's amazing. Not only did she win the decathlon, but she even beat all the men doing it. Did I say something wrong with regard to Serena Williams and Caitlyn Jenner? What did I say that was wrong? Because I have been told time and time and time again, I was just told this by the ACLU, we'll get to it in a moment, that trans women are women. I've just been told by the Biden administration that trans women, who maybe they look like men, maybe they have a bit of a husky voice, maybe they've got an Adam's apple and other male appendages, but very pronounced, I won't get into it. However, they're women. That's what I've been told. So if that is the case, then Caitlyn Jenner is the greatest female athlete of all time. There's no question. Serena Williams couldn't beat all the men in the decathlon. There's no chance. Now, the left believes, they say that they believe that men can become women, right? That trans women are women. But none of them believe that we should call Caitlyn Jenner the greatest athlete of all time. And by the way, you might say, this is one objection I've heard, but only from knuckle-dragging conservatives. They say, well, no. Caitlyn Jenner didn't win the decathlon. Bruce Jenner won the decathlon, but now Bruce Jenner no longer exists, and Bruce Jenner's Caitlyn Jenner. No, that's not what they believe. Go read the Wikipedia page. Read the Arthur Ashe Courage Award description that Caitlyn Jenner won. They believe, the left and the transgender ideologues believe, that Bruce Jenner never really existed. Bruce was always Caitlyn. He was always a woman trapped in a man's body, and therefore those accomplishments go to Bruce. Now, the reason I bring this up at all is a Democratic congressman, very radical guy from New York, Jamal Bowman, listed trying to attack Tom Brady. He says, kind of forget about Tom Brady. The greatest athletes of all time are 1, Muhammad Ali, 2, Serena Williams, 3, Tiger Woods. Come again? Number 2 is the big issue here. I won't take issue with Muhammad Ali or even Tiger Woods at the moment, but I will take issue with Serena Williams. She's obviously not the greatest athlete of all time because men are better athletes than women. Doesn't mean that women's tennis can't be an interesting thing to watch, especially when Serena Williams is screaming at the referees, but it's just to say that the men are stronger, they're faster, they're bigger than women. This is just a fact. We know that this is the case because Serena Williams herself, in the late 1990s, had a battle of the sexes where she said she thought she could beat a man who was ranked outside the top 200. So, very famously, a player named Karsten Braasch, who was ranked, I think, 203 or 208, decided he would play Serena Williams. Before their match, he prepared by playing a round of golf, smoking a bunch of cigarettes, and tossing back a few adult beverages. He then beat he actually played back-to-back games with both Williams sisters. He beat one of them 6-1. He beat the next one 6-2. It's just a fact of biology. Men are better at sports. We're not allowed to say this, though. Even though now we're having these debates about the transgender games, and you have even many feminists coming out and saying, wait a second, these men who now identify as women have an unfair advantage. Well, the ACLU is here to tell you that's completely fake. There is no advantage whatsoever. This is the ACLU of South Dakota, apparently not the cleverest ACLU chapter. They have an article out, Debunking the Myths Fueling Anti-Trans Legislation. This because South Dakota lawmakers are trying to ban men from playing in women's sports. So they have these myths that they're busting and these facts. Myth: the participation of trans athletes hurts cis women. Fact: including trans athletes will benefit everyone. Okay, well, what's the argument for that? It's kind of interesting, too, in this article. They put the fact first because they want you to read that top line, so it looks, it's very confusing because it seems that it says that we're going to debunk these things, and they say, debunking, including trans athletes will benefit everyone. It sounds like it's kind of actually the opposite article than it is. Again, more evidence that they're not the brightest bulbs in the pack there. Because their evidence is, many who oppose the inclusion of trans athletes erroneously claim that allowing trans athletes to compete will harm cisgender women. This divide and conquer tactic gets it exactly wrong. Excluding women who are trans hurts all women. It invites gender policing that could subject any woman to invasive tests or accusations of being too masculine or too good at their sport to be a real woman. Further, this myth reinforces stereotypes that those who identify as women are weak and in need of protection, and then it kind of follows that down a little bit too. Now, they're kind of highlighting all of these talking points, these left-wing talking points, but they never address the actual claim, which is that the trans athletes are stronger, faster, bigger, right, and therefore they'll beat the women. They never address that anywhere in the debunking aspect. Another one. Fact, trans athletes do not have an unfair advantage in sports. This is answering the myth, according to the ACLU, that trans athletes' physiological characteristics provide an unfair advantage over cis athletes. Now listen to their evidence here. Women and girls who are trans face discrimination and violence that makes it difficult to remain in school. According to the U.S. Trans Survey, 22% of trans women who were perceived as trans in school were harassed so badly they had to leave school because of it. Another 10% were kicked out of school. The idea that women and girls have an advantage because they are trans ignores the actual condition of their lives. That's not what we're talking about. Nobody's saying, the myth they're debunking is not that men who identify as women aren't bullied. The myth they're debunking, allegedly, is that the men are physically stronger. They don't even begin to address that. The rest of the article goes on in exactly the same way. It's very, very strange to me that anybody could possibly believe this ideology. You know, a couple of years ago, when this really was cropping up, I had a speaking tour, and one of the speeches on the tour was "Men are not women," and other uncomfortable truths. And I was physically attacked because I gave this speech. And at the time, it didn't make sense, but it's starting to make sense to me. It's starting to make sense. Because the problem is, well, one, you have to not believe your own lying eyes, right? To believe that, like, Billy, you know, who now goes by Bethany, is not physically stronger than an actual woman. But the other reason is because these two aspects of leftist ideology contradict one another. On the one hand, the LG part of LGBT, we're told you are born with certain sexual orientations and attractions. You can't change them, right? I'm born this way. No one would choose to be born this way. That was what they said in the 90s. Now they don't really say that anymore. But, because sex and sexual orientation is immutable, therefore we ought to tolerate sort of homosexual attractions and relationships. Okay, makes perfect sense to me. But then at the same time they say, also, there's no such thing as sex, there's no such thing as gender, everything's changeable, nothing is immutable, and men can actually become women. You say, well, that doesn't make any sense. If there's no such thing as immutable sex, innate sex, then there is no such thing as L or G. Andrew Sullivan, a gay guy, wrote an essay about this just a few years ago. How on earth will we resolve this problem? A lot of conservatives say that the transgender activism is going to sort of finally awaken many leftists to the incoherence of some of their ideology. I don't think so anymore. I don't think that's true. Because I was recently rereading George Orwell. And George Orwell describes this process exactly. He says, at the heart of the regime, the dystopian regime that he's describing, is doublethink. And what doublethink is the ability to hold two contradictory ideas in your mind at the same time. Right? Western philosophy is going all the way back to dear old Uncle Aristotle, is based on the idea that you can't do that. Or rather that a thing cannot be what it is and not what it is at the same time. Non-contradiction. But doublethink in the dystopian regime of George Orwell is this idea that actually a thing can be one thing and its opposite, and something different at the same time. And this is how they maintain power, because what we are told by Orwell is that if you have doublethink, if you're holding two contradictory ideas at the same time, then you are unwilling and unable to think very deeply about a lot of ideas. I think that is what the left is banking on. I don't think that this contradiction is a bug of political correctness or of leftism. I think it's a feature. I think it is a way to undermine our confidence in reason, or to undermine our confidence in objective truth. This is what the left has been pushing for a long time. Do you remember when the Smithsonian Institution put out a flyer about a year or so ago saying that rational thought and objective reality is a characteristic of whiteness and we need to get rid of it? And it was sort of an offensive flyer that they put out. But it's all part and parcel of the same ideology. I'm no longer confident that leftism, political correctness, wokeism, whatever you want to call it, is going to undo itself on its own contradictions, because the contradictions are the point. We're still dealing in the realm of logic, but what these kind of ideologies are doing is trying to undermine our confidence in reason and logic. I hope you enjoyed that clip from The Michael Knowles Show. To check out the full episode, hit the link in the description or download The Michael Knowles Show wherever you listen to podcasts.